When I started this little workshop on drawing with graphite pencil, I thought for me it would just be a review of basic stuff that I always knew. But the more I got into it, the more I discovered that actually preparing this really helped crystallize for me some basic ideas that have been given me kind of more success of working with my pencil. And also, I discovered that there was a fundamental thing about light and shadow that I had always misunderstood. And so my work for this workshop for me has been a real eye-opener, and I hope that there's going to be some new and useful stuff for you in it as well. We often have pencils with us, and it is such a critical drawing tool. It is so flexible, it is so accessible, they're everywhere, they never run out of ink. And what we want to do is to try to see if we can get more mileage out of our graphite pencil. So not lead pencils. Lead pencils poison us, so they're now all graphite pencils. For some reason we still call them lead pencils, but that would just be toxic. So we're going to play with our graphite pencils today. And when you get your graphite pencils, the first thing to notice about them is that there are different hardnesses of pencil. Some of the pencils are what we refer to as, there are hard pencils, there are soft pencils. So when we say hard, that means that the graphite that is in the pencil is so hard that when you rub it on the paper, not very much of it transfers over to the paper. So it stays sharp a long time. Some of these really hard pencils can, if you push hard with them, they'll even make a little groove in the paper. And they tend to make a lighter mark, and they don't smudge. So the harder it is, so they use, when they're talking about hard pencils, they use the letter H to mean hard. And the number that is in front of that H tells you how hard it is. The higher the number, the harder it is. So a 3H pencil is a little bit softer than a hard 5H pencil, which is even harder. So a 10-inch H pencil would be something like a diamond or something. You just can't make a mark with it. So hard pencils in one direction, soft pencils in the other direction. And for some reason, instead of an S, they use the letter B for soft. So the more B's there are, the softer it is. That means it gets blunt really fast, but it makes a rich, dark mark, and it smudges really easily. So when you buy a set, if you buy a set of pencils, it'll come with HB, 2B, 3B, 4B, 5B, 6B, and all the H's, same thing. And that's actually more kind of gradations of hardness than my brain can really keep track of. And I find myself going like, do I use my 3B or my 2B for this? Like, which one? Which one? For me, it's too much choice. So what I do is I kind of simplify it for myself. I have one in the middle, that's the HB. And I'll have maybe two on the softer end, perhaps a 2B or a 3B and a 5B or a 6B. So I've got a medium one, pretty soft, and a really soft. Instead I'm thinking like, which one? I'm sure there are pencil drawing experts out there where the distinction between a 4B and a 5B is like oh no, I really need my 4B for this one. But I'm not there. Bless their hearts, they're amazing. But my brain can't keep track of that much B. So for me, it's either 2B or not 2B. Same thing with the harder end. I tend to like really soft pencils, so sometimes I might bring with me, one hard pencil that might be, I don't know, a 3H or something like that. But I tend not to have a whole bunch of the sort of hard pencil department. So there are pencils to make marks, there are erasers to take them away. And there's a lot of variety of erasers. Can I borrow your little eraser right there?
Sure.
Right. So this is the Kneaded Eraser. And the Kneaded Eraser is an absolute gem for doing stuff with graphite pencil. And because it says Kneaded Eraser, a lot of people know that you have to kind of warm this thing up to get it to work. And so what a lot of people think they have to do is you're going to squeeze it, you're going to knead it like dough. And that takes forever, and unless you've got really powerful hands, that will really irritate you. So the best way to get these warmed up and ready to use is to pull them like taffy. So you pull it like taffy. That warms it up by the friction of that motion. And then if there's any dark graphite on the outside, it gets mixed into the matrix of this thing, so that cleans it, it softens it. It's now ready to use. And these are not used like you use a regular eraser, going chuck, 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 chuck. The way you use a kneaded eraser is, did anybody ever play with silly putty and newsprint? Right, you take the silly putty, you press it down there, and it's like, oh, look, there's Prince Valiant's face, right? And these work the same way. When you want to erase with this, you pull it like silly putty, and you press it either lightly or more forcefully onto your piece of paper. So this, as you lift up, there will be Prince Valiant's face right there, right? So you press it down onto your graphite. Without smudging, it is lifting graphite off. And so you can go tap, 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 and lift out that graphite. And then pull it a couple of times, all clean surfaces, tap, tap. It's lighter, it's lighter, it's lighter, it's lighter in steps. The harder you push, the more graphite it'll lift off. When I first get these, they're always in that little perfect rectangle. When I was a kid, I always wanted to keep it in that perfect rectangle. I thought that's the way it's supposed to be. And I didn't want anybody to mess it up. And I remember being really upset when somebody messed with my thing. Right? So you want it to be in this sort of blobby whole thing. Right? That's a happy kneaded eraser. You can also take part of a corner of it and taper it into a sort of a short, stubby point like that, and you're able to lift out, erase really fine lines and marks with it. So not just big blobby things. You can, and the short, stubby point is much useful than a long, tapered point. You try to erase with this, it's just going to bend. That's what's up with the little short, stubby. Just take your fingers and point and sort of squeeze your fingers into it. You get that short, stubby, angular point. That's what you're going to erase with. Awesome little erasing tool. Not very useful, though, for getting all the way back to white paper. Oops, I made a mistake. All right, you're going tap, tap, tap. It's going to lift out a little, a little, a little, a little, a little. That's where the white erasers come in. Does anybody have one of those white plastic erasers? Oh, yeah, can I borrow that for a second? Thank you, sir. All right, so these white plastic erasers, these bad boys are great for get back to clean paper. They work, they will lift out your graphite. If, however, you pressed really hard with your pencil, they will lift all the graphite out. You will still have a little groove in your paper, which can mess you up. You'll see in just a moment. I did a drawing where I did some lines and I didn't like them. I erased them. I had pressed too hard. And you'll see what happens when you press too hard and then erase it. So that'll come in just a second. But these things work great. In addition to just erasing mistakes, you can use these in a very strategic way for more sort of fine-tuned, careful erasing. And for that, what I really recommend you do is to get out a pocket knife and do some carving on your eraser. For me, at first, this was also a big oh no, I want this big square. It actually bothered me when it stopped being rectangular. But the edges of this can be very useful for erasing. And what I would recommend that you do is to cut off a triangular section, a little. Is it all right if I make a cut on this with you? You're okay with that? All right. Just wanted to make sure I had your permission. What I'm going to do is I have just made a chisel edge on this. All right? And I also have this little piece with a chisel edge. So I've got two. All right? You can make a variety of sizes of erasers that you can do different sort of precise, more exact erasing with. So taking a little penknife to your white eraser, a big block like this, it'll last a very, very long time. You can take these things, carve them into several little erasers, and you'll find that those are actually much more useful than that one big block. And you're going to find you love this little guy. This is a great little one. All right, here you go. So yours now comes pre-cut. Sometimes those white plastic erasers are in like the click erase thing, or sometimes they're little things that you can peel down. So some of them are in a stick, some are in a block. It's basically the same material. Recently, there's a company that has started to make these white plastic erasers in the super skinny style. They call these the Mono Zero. And I found these on, there's a website called Jet Pens that has all sorts of cool pens. And they sell, there's two varieties of these Mono Zeros. I'm particularly fond of the one that's just this little tiny round tip up there. And you could just use that like a pencil to draw in white lines. Really, really cool effects. I'll show you some examples of some Mono Zero-ish stuff. You can also get some of that effect with that that little angled white eraser that you have right there. Erasers and the erasing shield. So does anybody have an erasing shield here? Of one. All right, here we go. So this is a strange tool. Your first, and there's actually what I'll do is I'll hold. You'll see its shadow here. Oh, that didn't work very well. Anyway, here, there we go. You can see in the shadow there's a number of different shapes in it. You know, I don't know why we needed 15 little circles, but the idea of this is not a stencil. So this isn't like, oh, I want to erase a circle that's exactly this size, or a little happy face mark. What you do with this is if there's something that you've kind of made sort of too much of a mark, you want to erase a little bit of it, I'm going to put this down on my piece of paper, and so I can see through the hole the little kind of corner of something that I want to erase. And then I can erase very, very specifically on top of that. So if there's like part of an eye ring of something that I want to pull out, I can be very clear, I can be very precise and not smudge up the rest of my bird with my eraser. So this allows you to do some very kind of pinpoint accuracy erasing without messing what's around it. That's a useful thing. It's not used like a stencil though. Lastly, are blending tools called stamps or tortillons. These are little paper blenders that are gold for drawing with graphite. They're really, really, really neat. I used to think that the purpose of these things was I'd make a little kind of gray smudge, and now I'm going to smudge that out into my lighter area, going from dark to gray. Or have a bunch of marks and just sort of blend them together so you can't see the little marks. I now realize that it is an incredibly useful drawing tool. The way I use it now is I'll kind of take the tip of it, put it in a little bit of graphite, pick up a little bit of graphite on the end of that, and I use it just like a paintbrush. I can go paint, 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 paint. I can draw in, I can actually draw with this blending tool. So think of this as a drawing tool, not just a smudger. You're actually, and we'll do some examples of how we might be drawing with this in just a little bit. So these are some of the tools which you can use with your pencil set. What I'd like to do, yes, sir.
So you were talking about B and S pencil. So also in my set there was also a pencil called the F pencil. Do you know what those are?
An F pencil? I don't know.
F is equivalent to B.
It's equivalent to B?
Yeah, it stands for fine. B stands for blackness.
B stands for blackness. Now I know. Friends at home, B is for black. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. When you're working with graphite, there are all sorts of it's a great opportunity to play with light and shadow. Graphite really lends itself to showing the forms of objects by light and shadow. And so what I'd like to do before we kind of get into actually some techniques of applying your stuff, just to kind of break down a little bit of what is going on with sort of the components of light and of shadow. I thought I had this basically figured out until about a couple of weeks ago, when my whole world unraveled when I realized that there was a fundamental part of the basics of light and shadow that I'd always misunderstood. So I'm pretty excited about this now. So I want to share this with you. What I'm going to do is we're going to go through these shadows and we're going to name the parts of these shadows. And so that we can kind of identify them on different objects and think about what creates those and how I can kind of use those in what I'm doing. So actually coming up with some terms for the different parts of a shadow. You know that they say the Eskimos or Inuit have however many words for snow. Is not true? It's folklore? Oh, we have for friends at home, we've got a linguist in the room.
It's a classic linguist.
It's classic linguist folklore. All right. Well, it would be neat if they did. However, the artist who has more words for parts of a shadow will actually be able to see those. All right. So, so here we go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with, on this drawing, the darkest part of the shadow. You might want to follow along just sort of sketching out this bad boy here. We'll see all the different parts of them on this little sphere here. So draw lightly a little circle. Next month, we'll show you kind of how to draw a round circle. All right. Hard to do. Hard to do. You can see that I took sort of several stabs at it. You can see sort of one old line there, and I kind of got in there and erased it a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to think, if the light's coming from this side, there will be a light side and a dark side. You knew this already, though. But in the dark side, what I'm going to do is put in what's called my core shadow here as a crescent around this side. And here's the weird thing, it doesn't go all the way to the edge of the circle. The darkest part of the shadow does not. It's a little crescent in here, doesn't make it all the way to the edge. The reason that is that there is some light that has missed this object, hit the table out here, and bounced back, and is actually illuminating a little bit of the other side from the other side. They call this from the dark illuminating part of the dark side. They call this the reflected light. So I'm going to just take a little bit of a mid-tone of gray and put it into that area down there. I've got my core shadow and my reflected light. So the area right out there on the back edge, I'm not going to go all the way to dark. Also right here, you see what happens if you draw a line, erase it, but you pressed too hard and made a little groove in the paper. Do you see that little white line in there? That is the ghost of a line that used to be there. And so you can see that very, very clearly there. That's what happens if you press too hard when you're kind of laying in your circles. Oops. So I've got my dark side, I've got my light side. The side where the light is hitting, this is referred to as the center light. This area where the light is landing. That's where what's called my center light. And between the center light and this darkest shadow, I'm going to have a gradation of value from the bright side into that dark shadow. If you want to come up with a name for this sort of middle part here, you can call that the halftone in there. Getting from lighter, getting darker, 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 into that dark, dark. This is all done with one pencil. This was done with a fairly soft pencil, perhaps a 2B or a 3B. If I'm using a harder one, it's hard to kind of get fun darks. Yes?
Smudger does the trick.
Oh, the smudger is helpful, yeah. So here's the way I used to think that all this sort of light, dark worked. I knew that you have the light end and you have the dark end. I knew about the reflected light. Yeah. And we've probably seen this a million places. And then there's the highlight, right? And I always thought that, okay, the highlight is just another name for this sort of brightest part of this white part up here. But it turns out, oh no, it's not. This brightest part is just the part that is closest to the light. That's pointing towards the light, the surface that is pointing towards the light. That's my center light. Right? No matter where, so if you were to put a little mark on this, if we were to have a ball right here with light shining on it, we would all agree on exactly where that center light is located. But here's the weird thing. The highlight, if I gave us all a marker and said, now everybody put a little spot where the highlight is, a group of us standing in a circle around this sphere, we would all put our little marks in different spots. The highlight is a reflection. And a reflection is a relationship between the angle of the incoming light and the location of your eye. So as you move your head around on the same object, your highlight moves. So the good news is with this, you've got lots of flexibility with where you can put your highlight. All right? So here's my highlight. The reflection of the light, bink. No highlight, highlight. No highlight, highlight. My highlight is not in the same place as my center light. Isn't that crazy? All right. So what you want to do is, don't take my word for it. This whole concept was blowing my mind, and I kept waking up in the middle of the night, getting out of bed, going to the refrigerator, getting out an egg and a little flashlight, and standing there in game changer about this whole light dark thing. Give it a try. All right. So then, one last part of this whole shadow business is that objects, if you look at my hand here, by the way, looking at my hand, I can see my center light, I can see my core shadow. I can actually even see reflected light reflecting from the screen here on the back of my hand. But also take a look at this shadow. That's the cast shadow. That shadow of my hand on the screen, that's the cast shadow. So the cast shadow...
Explain again the way you're saying the position of the eye and the position of the angle of the light.
Uh-oh. Wonder if we'll be able to get that back. If here is my pen that doesn't work, if here is my object, all right, and if I have light that is what's going to happen is light that comes in and hits here, the light that I'm going to see as a reflection is bouncing off this object at the same angle that I'm going to do this on a flat surface. Let me try this. If this were out here. So light that comes in hits the water and bounces to your eye. All right. This angle is going to be the same as this angle. So, and if it is coming in from, if you are looking at it from 90 degrees, you are looking, that is this approach, right? If you move your eye over to here, right, or the flashlight over to the side, right? It's always an equivalent angle that is bouncing back to you. Did that make sense? So I don't have to get out there and calculate it. The really nice thing about this is that you have a tremendous amount of flexibility in how you can place your highlight, and nobody will really know unless it's way, way, way off. There we go. Did that help? Couple things to notice about this cast shadow. Number one, where it tucks up underneath an object, it's going to get really dark. All right? That's the darkest part of that cast shadow. And number two, is the shape of the cast shadow says something about the shape of the object that it is cast upon. Remember from our workshop on drawing trees how the shadows curved across those tree branches. The same thing is going on here. So if here I've got this angular object, this angular rod here, notice that the shadow is straight and then turns and comes down straight across that. And on the round object, it is rounded. And on the flat surface, I'm going to see that as straight. So the surface that the shadow is being cast upon, there is, just here I can see the shadow of one hand wrapping in loops around my fingers. So the shadow says something about the shape of that surface that it is being cast upon. What we're going to do now is take our collection of tools and use them together to start to draw some graphite pencil pictures. And we're going to do this in two really different styles. One rather energetic and expressive, and the other sort of finely, softly shaded. Let's start with that softly shaded thing and look at that on how the shadows might fall, how we might approach drawing a really rounded object. Here, a garlic clove. So I'm going to break down sort of step by step what I did here. I started with getting out my favorite non-photo blue pencil and framing in the basic shape of this. If you are doing this, if you're going to be making a finely shaded drawing though, be really careful with the non-photo blue pencil. If it starts to get even a little bit heavy, what it can do is act as a little bit of a resist, and sort of fine, soft grays are not going to stick to it. If you draw your line across it, that will work fine. But when you're kind of blending smoothly across it, any place where your wax is, the graphite will skip over. So one way of getting around this is to perhaps, with a very light touch, use something like a 5H pencil. And you can block it in with that. You can always erase those lines. But in either case, I like sort of starting out simply and adding more detail on top of that. Here, what I'm doing is I'm starting with the basic shape. It is wider than it is tall. It is kind of raindrop shaped, straight size, and here's the center axis of this. All right? So for me, those might be initial guidelines that will be helpful. Next month, what we're going to focus on is a bunch of artist visualization techniques to allow you to kind of see something and turn it into your fundamental drawing. All right? We're going to be taking a look at ways of sort of initially as you're approaching something, blocking it in that'll allow you to kind of get the oomph of that down on the paper really, really quickly. For this workshop, we're not going to be really going there. So in some of these demos, you'll see that, for instance, I'll be drawing a skull and sort of kind of quickly take you to look through. Here's kind of how I kind of created this framework to draw my details on top of. We'll go quickly through that part. Next month, we're really going to dig deep into that. But this would be kind of what I would do for this garlic clove. Does this kind of framing make sense? Again, too much non-photo blue pencil pressure, graphite skips over it. On top of this, what I do is I'm going to get out my HB pencil and draw in, with line, the basic structure of what I'm looking at. This gives me a target to start shading. When I want to start shading, I'm going to switch pencils. And I'm going to pick out perhaps a 2B pencil, and I'm going to drop in the core shadow, remember that crescent of core shadow, and the cast shadow underneath these. So again, the core shadow, remember, it is this rounded sort of crescent out there. That's my core shadow. And notice what I'm doing with my pencil strokes as I'm doing this. The pencil strokes here follow the contours of the garlic clove. So in the center, these are coming in straight. And here my pencil marks, if they show up, they kind of curve. Here they curve. So straight, curving, curving. If those lines show through, the direction of those lines will help say something about the curvature, the shape of this little garlic clove. And also notice that any pencil streaks that show through here I'm making all my marks horizontal, suggesting that this is a flat surface, this is this rounded surface. And now I'm ready for all my fun tools. The first one I'm going to grab is that little blender. And I'm going to kind of bring it down into here, pick up some of this graphite, and smear it out into this white zone here. This is kind of interesting. Do you see some of these lines in here? That is non-photo blue pencil underneath that graphite. Oops.
Do you want that? You can turn that into white print display.
Yeah, I'll play with that. Wasn't intentional here. See how some of those lines show through? I like that. And because they followed the contour, that's going to help me give the sense of roundness of this object. Hey, welcome. Now, for the really fun part. I'm going to get out my eraser. But again, the eraser's not there for correcting a mistake. I draw with my eraser. So first I'm going to get my kneaded eraser, pull it like taffy, and go tap, 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 tap in here, lightening some of these areas. And then I'm going to get out that mono 0 and start to carve in light ridges around this. Again, following the contour of that. Look at this nice little reflected light. Just pick that up with the tip of the eraser. You can also experiment with, and by the way, if you had done this whole thing, say with just an HB pencil, your ability to lift out these shadows and things is not going to be as good. Because remember, those softer ones are better smudgers. They're also more erasable. To get a dark mark with the HB pencil, I really have to start pushing with it, and that locks it into the paper. So the light touch allows me to lift things out, so I can start essentially drawing with the eraser. Look out here, I'm just drawing here with my eraser to put in some of the rootlets on the underside of this. So don't think of the eraser as a tool for correcting a mistake. Think of it as a tool to draw light on a dark surface. That's where it really becomes fun. Now, on top of this, I'm going to grab my pencil again. This time I'm going to go for a fairly dark pencil. And I'm going to sketch in some of the little flecks of papery tissue on the outside of my garlic clove. While I was drawing this, I was handling it too much, and I used to have this big sheet that came through here. It ripped in half, so I just sort of drew what I now had. I want to point out a couple of little things with this. Notice that this edge of this little paper thing, I don't have to draw that all the way through. It looks really cool when you let some of it kind of disappear, some of it I emphasize. So this would be a place where it kind of lifts away from the tissue like that, and there's a shadow underneath it, and then it comes and presses up against it. That's called a lost and found edge. And that can be a really interesting thing to start to bring into your drawings. Let the viewer do some of the work. This part down here looks a little bit rooty, but if I take my pencil and I darken in some of these little spaces here, between these little rootlets, it really pops. I'm going to just toggle back and forth between this and the previous step a couple of times, and notice where I'm using the eraser to add things. So first notice where I'm using the eraser to add whites. See that? Now look at where I'm using my pencil to add darks. I should have kept that lost and found edge. I really liked it. Too bad. The detail and these darks are the last thing to go in. If I did them at the start, they would have gotten all lost and smudged out. So I save it for the end. It's a little bit of spice to sprinkle on at the end, and bam, you're done.
So, big difference for me in this one and the one previous is this one looks 3D all of a sudden. With the garden.
Yeah. One thing that helps is also these lines kind of wrapping around it too. Let's take a look at a different subject. Instead of something that's really rounded, something with very distinct planes. And I'm also going to take a look at a different energy of drawing. Here, a sort of a vigorous kind of sketchy drawing style. This is sort of more my kind of usual approach. It's a lot of fun to create a sketch like this. But I want to take a look at how to suggest planes on a surface. You know, you get the sense that there's a flat thing coming down here and then it's turned down here. Why do we feel that? Let's take a look at what is going on to create that. I'm going to kind of quickly move through some of my preliminary lines here. And next month we'll kind of get into the theory and the practice behind that. And I'm also going to show you an example of a step which I didn't do in my preliminary drawing that I should have, and it ends up being a mistake in the final drawing. So these preliminary drawings are a great way to prevent yourself from making mistakes down the line. Hey, it's good to see you. I was hoping I'd get to see you guys today. So we're about to get into sort of a drawing of a skull here. Initially what I did is I did a big circle that encapsulated the overall size of this thing. How wide is it compared to how tall is it? So I'm starting from the least possible detail possible and moving into progressive levels of detail. This is the brain case back here. This is that sort of front face of the skull. And there is no one way you're supposed to do this. It's going to be different for any object that you do. But the basic principles you'll see, and I couldn't do this sort of making it up out of my head. I was actually looking at the skull on the table in front of me. So like I wouldn't know to make a line there, like how, and then that ends up being something that is useful. I'm actually looking at a skull when I'm doing this. So that's an advantage that I have that you can't see. Maybe it'd be good to have that projected here, but I wasn't that organized. This is the center line through the face of the thing, and then a few guidelines across that to help me kind of keep parts of the face parallel with each other. I don't want to have like one eye up here, one eye down here. That's why you often see people drawing a human face. They'll draw that center line through the middle, and then they draw a line right through the eyes. Actually, it makes a neat T right through the center of the head. Same sorts of things here. These are guidelines to keep my bits parallel. Next month, we're also going to be looking at kind of a few kind of construction lines to sort of start to three-dimensionally block in the shape of something. Here are my eyes and cheekbones. And that was my basic framework that I used to put in my, to block in this skull. Let me show you something that I didn't do back at this step. Anything odd about those two eyes? Foreshortening is a little bit strange. That back one is bigger. So it's foreshortened. It's going to be tilted, but it should be, if anything, smaller, right? I didn't catch it here, right? And once I this is the stage where I can catch and correct those things. Once you start putting in detail, you won't notice these sorts of things until your whole drawing is done, right? So this was my opportunity to catch it. If I'd done, next week we're going to talk about one of the sort of steps that we're going to do is just get in there and just measure a little bit, right? But I didn't, because I was like, oh good, I get to draw the skull now, right? So I went ahead and drew my skull. And there you see that same mistake now reflected in the final drawing. Right? At this point, it's too late for me to do anything about it. And I wasn't even at this point aware that that was a goof. The chance for me to get that was here. Right? But I was too excited to kind of get on to this part. What I'll often do is sort of initially block in my my shape. It's easier for me to kind of draw, the shape of this if I already have something telling me roughly it's going to be this long and going about here. So I'm actually not thinking of how big things are at this stage, because I'm thinking I've figured that out with my blue pencil drawing. I just wasn't careful enough. Does that make sense?
When you're drawing this, are you thinking three-dimensionally or are you thinking shape?
I'm bouncing back between both of those. So the question was, am I thinking three-dimensionally or am I thinking shape? And I'm sometimes I'm doing both of those. Often while I'm laying in an individual line, I will be thinking shape. And then when I'm looking at sort of how elements fit together, I'm thinking three-dimensionally. It's hard for me to do this and kind of get my line work to be solid at the same time. So then I come along on top of this, and I know that things like a powerful, bold line will pop forward in a drawing. And so I then can come over this and strengthen some of those lines. So now I feel ready to put in some value. All right, I'm going to put in shade, what the people often call shading. This is the difference, sort of dark and lights. And what is going to be neat about this? So it's not just that I'm going to have some areas and they're going to get lighter. But where there is a change in the value, that is the darks and the lights, that means that there is a change in the surface planes of the object that I'm looking at. All right? So look at these little geometrics here. Where there is a change in the surface plane, that means the direction of this surface, there's a change in how dark or light it is. Right? And that's what I want to be showing on my drawing. I want to show how the thing is sculpted three-dimensionally in space. And I'm going to do that by where I place my darks and where I place my lights. Another thing that I can do to suggest these planes is here, the directions of the lines on these is just random. So if I'm doing like smooth shading, I don't have that. But if my lines actually show through, those lines can also suggest the directions of the planes. Here I'm doing what I call the raindrop technique. If a raindrop landed here, it would follow this path down. Each one of these lines is straight down to the ground. All right, that's the shortest path to the ground. All right, So on this, I'm going to take this general approach and apply it on top of that skull. So this sharp change in these values means that there's a sudden change in plane. This gradual change means that it's a more rounded surface. The direction of these lines suggests the angle of that plane. Notice that look at this one back here. See how these ones are coming this way and these are coming this way? You get the sense of this being a surface up like that and this being a surface like that. You get a sense that this is a surface coming down here and this is a surface slightly rocked out like that. because of the directions of those lines. The last thing that I'm going to do on this is add a little bit of detail. And the detail comes at the very end. Where do I put detail in our drawing? At the end of my drawing. And where on the drawing? When we're looking at objects around us, with near versus far, where do you see more detail? Near. And I'm going to do that intentionally. On the parts of this that are closer to me, I'm going to add more detail. On parts that are further away, those are going to get less detail. And also with texture, I'm going to add a little bit of texture. This skull had all these little divots, little pits in it. They were really cool. And where am I going to put those is really interesting. Let's take a look at where you see texture on a round object. Where do you see the best evidence of the craters? Yes, the border between light and shadow. The official name, by the way, for this border, you like this? That's the terminator. So this is the terminator line. And along the terminator, that is where the texture of the object is the most profound. Out here, there are craters and things on the side of the moon here, but you cannot see them because the sunshine is for bouncing like that. Yeah, you cannot see that there. But out here, it is glancing sideways across the, how do you say, the round holes. All right? So, these, along the terminator here, that's where you get your texture. Right? And so, keeping that in mind, I'm now going to drop detail into my skull. So, without, with. So right as I come up in here, side closer to me as I'm making that turnaround, as this kind of emerges into the light out there, pop some of that in along this edge here, as this little part kind of comes around a little bit into there, and not so much way back there. And that's what really pops the drawing. Putting in the details like this is really crazy fun. So you have to just make sure you don't overdo it. These little divots of darkness here are the accents. But if they are everywhere, there is no accent, right? So to keep them as accents, I'm going to use them sparingly in the right along the terminator, right? And in those parts that are closer to me. Here's another example of a skull. Look at how line direction is really used here to show planes. This, you feel that this, you can feel this skull kind of bulges out and comes back in here because of that line direction. So that line direction is a really useful thing to sculpt what we're seeing three-dimensionally.
What is that?
That is a mountain lion skull from the California Academy of Sciences, from their skulls exhibit.
What was the previous one?
That was a bobcat skull. So let's take a look at one more mountain lion and kind of how I would pop that up. It's going to be similar sort of thing. Different ways you can initially block something in. For this, getting this sort of central. I like that this. When I looked at the mountain lion skull here, it seemed to have this rectangular block right here of its teeth, and there are my eyes. Gosh, I wish I measured my eye height at this step. See, same thing again, right? How easy would it be to change that here?
So I have a question. So when you're at this stage, do you have to look? How many
Yeah, yep. So what we'll be next month we'll be looking at this. So you're going to pause. You're going to pick something as a measurement tool, like an eyeball, and say use that to say, how far is this? Okay, that's one eyeball down to here, right? And like, oh yeah, that one is too big. You actually would be measuring on your thing and just doing a little measurement check, right?
Would it be the same measurement as it, or gets progressively smaller?
It would either be the same or smaller, but not, as we see here, larger. Oops. All right? But see, the seductive thing is, I want to go draw this skull. It's so beautiful. There's this skull sitting out there going, come to me, right? And you really want to get there. And so you skip past doing this. And then you look on later, and you kind of go, oh. Right? But I was so excited to get in there and draw this skull. Here are my cheekbones. Right? I want to go draw the skull. That I didn't stop, I didn't slow down. It's like when we're drawing birds, I talk about checking your proportions. Same thing here. I just didn't stop and I checked my proportions, even though I say that all the time. I just flew past it and I ended up with, look at the size of those orbits. Right? Oops. Again, I'm kind of blocking this thing in lightly with my pencil. And then I can come across that with a more deliberate line, clean up some of my edges, and strengthen some of my lines to give it a greater sense of depth. A heavy line really pops forward. Notice that here, this little part of the lower jaw that's up here and its relationship to this orbit, it's very confusing. But when this is a strong line and that's light, their relationship becomes more clear. So kind of clean up my lines. And I can keep this as a line drawing, or I can use, look for the planes on it. Again, I'm trying to show, you get this sort of sense of how does the planes of this thing change as you're moving around. And I can show that with that line work bleeding through. The last thing that I do is the details. Last thing I'm going to come in and do is my details. So I put those in, and it's just so much fun. So notice a little bit of texture. Where is the texture? The parts that are closer to me and the parts that are, I'm getting that texture sort of in those twilight zones.
So you almost don't put details in the lightest zone?
So in that lightest zone, if there's a really kind of bold pit there, I might put something in. But also in those zones, that is where the light's going to be striking directly and washing out the details of those little pits. It's in the twilight zone where you get that glancing light. That's why photographers love going out in morning and evening. They get that low light. It gives texture to all sorts of things in photography. And so this is evening light as kind of coming right around there. This would be noon light. You can keep it like this just as a graphite drawing and it stands on its own. I did this on a piece of toned paper and decided to throw a little bit of a watercolor wash on it and play with my paints a little bit. An interesting approach to experiment with your paint is for the dark parts, try putting on transparent watercolor. All right, make your darks transparent. And if you are using opaque paint, when you go to put on your lights, make your darks transparent but your lights opaque. It's an interesting kind of different way of sort of experimenting with stuff. With watercolor, it's all transparent, right? But if you're using something like gouache, you get a really, really interesting, very powerful effect by putting your by experimenting with the lights, making those be opaque. And you had a question, sir.
Yes. So what's toned?
Oh, toned paper means just paper that's, instead of being white, this was sort of an off brown, right? And so then, because it's kind of got some color to it, it could be brown, it could be gray, it could be a garbage bag from the groceries. I mean, not a grocery bag, right? that brown paper. If I draw on that, I can then also take my white and put it on top of that. So here is putting white on top of the toned paper. Do you see how that kind of allows me to pop? But be careful, that white is really fun to put on, so you want to put it everywhere. Restraint again, restraint. Just, an accent is no longer an accent when it is everywhere.
Is that white gouache?
Yes, this was white gouache. White gouache paint. Yes?
I went to Cascadero like 2 days ago and we found a lot of bones and someone took them under the sand, so the bones were not bleached by the sun and they were like brownish color. If part of the skull or the head or whatever is on the drawing is not even bleached, then you don't have to put the white on top of it.
In case you didn't hear the question, she said she was looking at some bones recently that she found, and parts of them were kind of yellowed and browned, and other parts were bleached. She was saying that, you know, something that she might consider as she's drawing that is that when she's drawing those dark stained browned parts, even though they may be in full sun, it's a darker value, and maybe she wouldn't be putting her white paint on those. And I agree with her approach on that. So we're going to see value as light and dark. It could be because of the sun. It could be the local color of that object that you're looking at. Both of those can darken the subject. Let's slightly turn our focus here. I'm going to move back to taking a look at a skull that I'm going to do in sort of more of this blended style. And we'll move back to that energetic style at the end again. But I want to take a look at a drawing here of a great horned owl skull. And in this skull, I'm really exploring a value range. It's really easy, especially if you just are drawing with, say, an HB pencil or a number 2 pencil. The range, you have like this much range of light to dark. Here's the white of my paper, and then here's the darkest that this pencil can go. But if you are pulling, bust out a 5B or a 6B pencil, all of a sudden you can push the range of dark whoop, all the way over here. And this dynamic range of light to dark is real. That's what is going to give a drawing a real sense of atmosphere, of excitement. And it's really fun to do. Let's take a look at how I approach that with this skull. I'm going to kind of fly through the sort of what my introductory lines were. This time I did measure it, right? And I got that the beak was about the same length as the head. Glad I'm kind of learning something here. Then approximate shape of the beak, approximate shape of its eye hole, the orbit. This was the center line down the middle of its head. And then a few lines just to kind of give me the geometry of the top surfaces of the skull. And I was thinking about how those relate to the center line. The last thing that I did is that this skull, owls have a bone ring actually in their eye that holds the lens out away from the back of their eye. And this skull had that bone ring in place. So I just did a little circle where the edge of that was. This was my kind of preliminary sketch. Fortunately, I measured it. Right? If I have this sort of background, then over that I can get out my, in this case, an HB pencil and start to loosely block in a little bit more details of what I'm talking about with that skull. The non-photo blue pencil is not going to be as bold as this in real life. It'll be just barely visible in front of you. I've just enhanced it on the screen here so that you can see what my guidelines were doing. So I get this. I don't have any really clear, crisp line work here, but I'm kind of defining those shapes a little bit better. Then on top of this, I can erase little bits of this line and refine them. And here is that skull just tricked out a little bit more. I'm able to be more bold, more confident, because yes, that is where that little line goes. Now, as I'm finally drawing this line, I can draw with the surety and confidence and I get a bold sketch. I could leave this just as a line drawing. But because I'm doing things with graphite, and graphite lends itself so beautifully to playing with, showing the form through values, showing the planes with values, I'm going to explore that with this skull. So here is my approach. As I look around this room, I can see probably billions of shades of gray, from the brightest bright to the darkest dark. Drawing those billions of shades of gray is overwhelming for my brain. I cannot handle it. Just as I can only handle a few pencils, if I'm trying to think of this, is this a 25% gray or a 30% gray? All right, no. I can kind of handle about 4 shades of gray. Right? But what I do that makes my drawing work is that I've got a limited number of shades of gray, but I really look at, here's the trick, I look at what are the shapes of each of those areas, because the shapes of those areas, where it turns from medium gray to light gray, is going to be the edge of a plane. I know that where my shades are shifting, that's going to define the planes of this object. And that's more important than sort of slowly blending out from darker to lighter to lighter to lighter to lighter. Even if it's a little bit jumpy, I'm still going to get a better sense of the form if I pay attention to those. If I can get that, just throw a little bit of smudging on top of it, I'm golden. I started by looking at where are the highlights on this critter. This critter had highlights right here, up in here on the top, and also had a little bit of highlight right here on top of this bone ring coming out of the eye. Right. Now, I'm going to get a 2B pencil and just shade in all the part that is not those highlights. So I'm not really doing anything very fancy with my shading here. What is important, though, is that I'm paying attention to what I really want to keep is what are the shapes of those highlights up there. That's what I'm trying to get. So even though I'm putting in my shade and shadow, I'm not thinking about where it is. I'm thinking less about that than I'm thinking about, I want my highlight, my center light up here to be a shape. I want that to be a shape. Right? Now, I've established my middle gray. This drawing is going to have basically 4 values in it. This is my middle gray. I'm now going to punch in what is my dark. And again, I said it's easy to give us this sort of value range that's very limited. If you get a dark pencil, like a 5B, and throw in some darks early on, it is going to force your whole drawing to kind of come up to that point. You can force your hand and make yourself get a richer value range because you put in a dark anchor early on. So what I did is I grabbed my dark pencil and I said, here's my dark anchor. When I say dark on this drawing, I mean that. Now I'm going to take that dark and bring it into a few areas on my drawing. And is this drawing mostly dark or mostly light? Mostly dark. So because it's mostly dark, what I'm going to do is between these 2 dark values, I'm going to pick one more intermediate value between that dark and that dark. I'm going to get one more intermediate value and place that as a shape here in this. So I'm going to take my darks, put them in here. I'm going to take my intermediate value. If this was mostly light, what I would do is pick a value between those 2 and put that in. All right? So let's see what that looks like. Notice that I'm kind of developing a lost and found edge back here. I'm kind of losing the back of my skull into that dark. Right? Let the viewer do some of the work. Right? They'll like your picture even better. Right? A little bit of a lost and found edge there. But I've got great value range starting now. I'm going dark. I'm keeping my lights. They're shapes. That's a shape. That's a shape. That's a shape. Right? And then I'm going to get out my blending tool and just smooth a little bit of that together. Also notice that I started drawing a little bit of texture out here onto this upper skull surface. It had some little just... My drawing tools are both this and my eraser. I get out my eraser and I start drawing with that. There's a little bit of dance back and forth. I can add, if I erase too much, I can put some more back in with my smudger. If I darkened too much, right, I can pull that back out with my eraser. I'm going to play back and forth with those two until I kind of basically like the balance of what I have. Yes?
Where do you apply the kneaded eraser?
Oh, we'll take a look here. So here is smudger, erased. Smudger, erased. You can see how a lot of parts in here just got a little bit lighter without getting smudged. That was just tap, tap, tap with that kneaded eraser. A little bit, I wanted more in here. I wanted this to be darker relative to something here, so I tap, tap, tapped a little bit in there. Does that make sense?
So the kneaded eraser is like a tool to dial back?
Yes. You pull it like taffy till it's soft, then you go tap, 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 and you can incrementally dial back your darks. Right? Or you can pull a little part of it into a point and pick out a little bit of... The last thing that I did is I dropped in some detail. Oh, the second to last thing. So I dropped in some detail. Let's see what that looked like. You see that it really pops. If I had put this detail in early, it would have all gotten smudged and messed up. But because it feels really crisp, because I'm putting it in as this last step. But it's fun to do, so you want to do it early. Right? And it's also fun to do, so you want to do too much of it. You just want to hold back, so without the detail, with the detail. And that's just coming in with a 5B pencil, punching in some of those details, and pop. The last thing I said, sometimes it helps to kind of get away from it. I sort of walked across the room and I realized that this value in here was really close to this out here, and the head was kind of getting a little bit lost on that background. Often it's contrast, strong contrast, that makes something pop. So I just got out my 5B pencil one more time, punched up the level of darkness in the background. And there's the skull. So thinking of the kneaded eraser, the mono zero eraser, the smudging tortillion thing. I don't know, what's the right way to pronounce it? Does anyone know? I'll call it a tortillion. Maybe there's a different pronunciation. All right, those things, they're drawing tools. Not just, those erasers aren't just there for kind of getting rid of a mistake, but I want to sort of play with that drawing. I want to play with lights and darks. I want my lights to have a shape. I want my darks to have a shape, right? And I don't have to think of a million scale. Once I do a little bit of blending, you end up with something that is some sort of smooth transitions. But as I was going about that drawing, I was only focusing on 4 values, but I was intentionally placing those in my drawing. One last one for you. And this was a little pelvis of a fawn. And the bones weren't really fused together very well. It was this really interesting little shape. I really just fell in love with this cluster of bones and wanted to explore it through drawing. So I first made myself an overall pencil sketch of it. And then I thought, I'm going to put in, again, that middle value. And when I'm putting in that middle value, again, what I'm doing is I'm defining the shape of my brightest sort of center light zone. I'm defining the edges of my bright zone by where my middle value stops. So I've defined the edges of my brightest value, the highest value, by being where the edge of that middle value stops. So to get that to be a real shape, I don't want to just sort of smudge out and then stop at some random point. I want to really look at this thing and say, where is it light? Where is it dark? Right? And what I did in this case is I drew a very faint line up here around the edges of what was the lightest part, right? Like this. Do you see that? So I'm drawing a little line to say, this is where I'm seeing my brightest highlights. And when I have that, I can use that as a guide for placing in these sort of cross-hatched middle values. But I get these fine little shapes because I had locked them in with a little line. I want those bright areas to be a real shape. That's what's going to give form to the whole drawing. Now I'm going to do the same with the darks. Then I got out my smudger and had fun with that. And then what was really fun on this drawing was playing with my eraser. I got in there and I drew with my eraser. Well, often I think when I'm kind of there playing with my eraser is sunlight. My eraser is light. And where is light falling? And I'm thinking that my hand, this is light. I'm making light. And so this, for instance, had these little ridges in here that were kind of peaked up like that, and they caught a little bit of light. And with my eraser, I could draw just along that, and the form of that really popped out. You get really interesting shapes when you start to combine eraser with smudger. It's a dance between the two of them. And then my final step, I pull out my dark pencil and I drop in my detail. I drop in my texture as the final little step. And a little bit goes a long way. Those little details, those darks, are the accent that really makes it pop. That's often what draws people's attention. And again, it's really fun to do, so we want to do it way too early. But if I wait till this point, when I put those in, they can remain crisp. And then here's the dangerous part of it, though. This is so much fun, you don't know when to stop. So a little bit's good, and what happens is you get this little dopamine hit from it. You're going, ooh, right? Ooh. So you go, ah! Right? And you're thinking, maybe I should have stopped about 5 minutes ago, right? So when you're baking a turkey, right, there's a little thing that pops out and says, turkey done. There's no equivalent in sketching. There's nothing that says, drawing done, I would stop now, right? So I'm having so much fun here, I just keep going. And now, rather, if there's accent everywhere, it just looks like you've taken a pepper shaker and shaken it all over this entire thing, right? So here is kind of working for me. There are accents here, right? So stop before you're done. Stop before you're done. There's no way to tell when you're done. But if you stop before you're done, a drawing that's a little bit underdone is much better than a drawing that's going to be overworked. What I'd like you to do is to reflect on these ideas and see, is there something from this class that you want to incorporate into your game? What for you, choose for yourself what for you is like the biggest take home. What is your number one take home? Right? Anybody for you? What is something that you want to incorporate into your game? Yes, what is it for you, sir?
The shading angle.
I heard
The shading angle, that's just
All right, so using the lines on those shading things to suggest those planes. Was that what you're talking about? Yeah? Yes, sir. Drawing with the eraser. So the eraser is not just a mistake correction tool. It's a drawing tool. All right, incorporate that into your game. Yes, sir.
Yes, like
Right? So increasing your value range, not just sort of working in HB land, but pushing that out. That's something that's really nice about a soft pencil. Right? One caveat with soft pencils, they do like to smudge. So let's say you've got this in your field sketchbook and you've got all these really great sort of shaded drawings. That rides around in your sketchbook for a couple of weeks. The pages start doing this against each other as they're walking along in your backpack. And soon what happens is all that careful variation in value turns into one big gray mass. One way around that is when you get home from a day of sketching, just take your journal outside with a can of fixative. It's a sort of spray stuff. You go, shh, right? You don't need a heavy coat on it, right? Then let it kind of air out for a while. It'll make that pencil drawing smell odd for a little while, but it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to smear. I also don't recommend soft pencil drawings on facing pages in a journal because they will smear into each other. All right? Also, if I imagine I had a journal here and I've opened it up, when I'm drawing on this page over here, my pencil is pressing all the graphite from the other drawings that are on this side of my journal that I've already done. It's pressing those together and making things, really help things smear over there on that side. So if you're doing a lot of soft pencil stuff, I will often have one side blank and I'm drawing on this side. You may say, but that's wasting paper. Right? If you want to save paper, reduce the amount of junk mail that comes into your house. Right? You're flooded by a bunch of junk mail. There's nothing. I talked to a tree the other day, and the tree said, "Look, if you are going to do something with me, I'm honored to be part of the nature journal. That's cool. Just that junk mail, that's just so humiliating, right? So one of the best ways that a tree could end up is in your nature journal. They're okay with it, right? So you should be too. And here is your homework. Find a rounded light object. That could be an egg, a mushroom, a garlic clove, and play with how you would show the volume and form of that rounded object. Right? Look for those different aspects of light on it. You might even get a place where you have one kind of clear light source. If you're a room with fluorescent lights, it makes lighting really confusing. Get one clear light source. There's a lamp. If you're a right-handed person, from your left side here, there's a lamp over here. That way your shadow doesn't go across what you're drawing. And make a drawing of that. See which of these tools starts to work for you. And then set it aside, have a cup of tea or a glass of milk, and come back and do it in a different way. Then find yourself an object with angles. Right? So you're talking about those planes, right? It's those planes are cool. I want to get something where I can show these planes. Find something with cool planes. Right? Make a sketch of that. Explore with these pencils. See if you can expand your value range. Right? See if those lines show through, can you get them showing those planes? Get yourself to start to see planes. A lot of people don't see planes. Right? So train yourself to look at an object and say, there's the plane, there's a plane, there's a plane, there's a plane, right? Have that so that what you draw is a real sign of what you really see and understand. Have fun with it, right? As you saw, I make plenty of mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. You want to get good? You have to make lots of mistakes, right? So start making them more quickly. Right? So just make lots and lots of mistakes. Give yourself permission. Have fun with it. Let yourself just get out there and journal and draw and draw and draw and draw and see what happens and see what happens. Right? And just as an experiment, see what happens if you kind of go like, all right, I think this one is good. Now I'm just going to see what happens when I start putting too much detail on it. How's that going to look? Right? You'll feel like, oh yeah, this is fun. It's fun. Oh yeah, I should have stopped earlier. Right? Don't worry about making any of your drawings good. Think about making lots of drawings, because every drawing, it's not the goal. It's just practice for the next one. And that's practice for the next one. And that's practice for the next one. And all of this is a tool to help us learn to pay more attention, to slow down and notice beauty and wonder and the amazement of this world in the common things that we're passing by every day. In the pelvis of a fawn, how much beauty can you find there? And the world opens itself up to you. Have fun with it, and thank you for coming. Posts. We also are going to put this up as a YouTube video. And I want to thank Ashok for being our videographer and sound technician. So, really appreciate it. If you are able to make a donation to support these programs and these workshops, it's greatly appreciated by me and my family. I've got a jar here for donations, but also if you're able to make a larger donation, donations that are made through my website are all tax deductible. And some people have made some larger donations, really helping me push this forward, and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you, folks. Yes, sir.
I have a question. So I like to draw maps. So when I draw maps, what do I do for drawing like maps?
So for adventure maps, sorts of things? So,
No, like actual maps.
oh.
He's crazy about
Can I see?
This is not his usual journal.
Oh, okay. So what I might do if I were you is on